It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Hello and welcome to the Happy Families podcast. This is Dr. Justin Coulson, dad to 6 kids, author of 9 books and counting. Every Tuesday on the pod, I answer your questions. I love this. I love Tuesdays. I get to answer the questions that you're asking about how to make your family happier. If you would like to submit a question, go to happyfamilies.com.au. You can click on the podcasts link and then push the record button. It's so simple. You can do what Lisa has done.
Hi guys, my name's Lisa from the Central Coast in New South Wales. Talk to me about ADHD and ODD in preschoolers. What is early signs of this and what's just being 3? I'd love to know some tips on how to manage that behaviour and also how to get help if it is something that needs to be diagnosed. Thanks guys. Love your work.
Lisa from the Central Coast, so glad to hear from you. Love the Central Coast. I grew up there. Let me go down memory lane for a sec before I answer these questions. I grew up at Niagara Park. My local school was Niagara Park Primary School. I lived in Joppa Street, used to walk to school. Even as a kid, like 6 years of age, I'd walk up over the hill, down the huge footpath ramp, up this really steep, or down this really steep decline, cross the road, go to Niagara Park School. There's a little shopping centre just in there. I used to steal 20-cent coins from my parents and run into the shopping centre and spend it on that video game called 1948. The I think it was 48, the World War II fighter plane sort of game. And then when we got a little bit older, I moved across to Erina. Lived just behind Erina Fair, not too far from there, before that whole area was developed. 1.25 acres. It was just fantastic. Used to climb up the back of Kincumber Mountain and check the surf, and then go down to Erina Fair and catch buses to the beach. Terrigal Beach, Womble Beach, Foresters Beach, Avoca and North Avoca, Copa and Max. My first job was at the Woolworths at Erina Fair. Anyway, I digress. Great place. What a great place to raise a family. Absolutely beautiful. Lisa, you're in a fantastic place for those kids. But obviously, I mean, I can hear the challenge in your voice. Raising little kids is hard. And I totally get why you're saying, does my 3-year-old have ADHD? I'll tell you why. This is a time of enormous, just explosive brain development. Through those first early years of life, the brain creates literally billions of neurons, synaptic connections, and this is just such an explosive time in a child's brain. And there's so much going on there that they really have a hard time trying to figure out how to do life. As a result of 4 things, most parents of 2 and 3 and 4 and even 5-year-olds will struggle. Now, I've got an entire webinar about this called Little People, Big Feelings. It's on the Happy Families website. For the small price that it will cost you, I would highly recommend it. It'll make a difference. But let me give you like a 5-minute summary. 4 things that can make these young years really challenging. Number 1, limited language capacity. So your child doesn't have a whole lot of words, especially around the age of 2 or 3 or 4. And quite often when they're driving us crazy, we'll say things like, use your words, but they don't have the vocabulary. They can't really tell us what's going on. It's very unusual for you to say to a child, what's happening? And for them to look at you and say, so glad you asked, Mum. Let me describe to you everything that's happened in the last 15 minutes that has led to, and they don't have the self-awareness. Even if they had the language, they don't have the self-awareness, the cognitive capacity to reflect on what's going on. They really are hugely reactive, which leads me to items 2 and 3 on this important 4-point list. They have limited emotional regulation. And obviously, when you can't regulate your emotions, it's extremely hard to regulate your behaviors. Therefore, with limited language and emotion regulation that's just beginning to develop, I mean, this starts around about 3, and I know plenty of adults that still don't regulate their emotions well, but usually you can regulate your emotions reasonably well under most circumstances, somewhere around about the age of 9, based on what developmental psychologist research has pointed to, somewhere about 9. So you're dealing with a 3-year-old who's going to fly off the handle with big emotions, and the big behaviors follow. One more really big challenge that you have with kids this age is they haven't yet developed this thing that psychologists call theory of mind. It's just a fancy way of saying perspective taking. That is, am I able to get that somebody in my environment wants something different to me? When Mum says it's time to leave the park, and I don't want to, do I understand that there is another agenda operating here? And the simple reality is that kids under about the age of 5-ish don't get it. Most research points to 4.5 to 5.5 being the the developmental stage where theory of mind or perspective taking kicks in. Now, there is some more recent research, it's still a point of contention, that suggests that it could even be later, as late as 7. But we're talking about averages here. We know that boys develop neurologically more slowly than girls. And we also know that when it comes to things like ADHD, which is widely and fairly well accepted as a neurological disorder, we know that this is going to slow down regulation and inhibition even more. So it's not unusual for ADHD kids to not really get a handle on their emotion regulation until they're, 11 or 12, especially if they're boys. And of course, that's when they step into adolescence and the brain goes through another huge explosion and there's a whole lot of new neural wiring and neurodevelopment occurring. So, Lisa, based on what you're describing, I'm really, really, really reluctant to suggest that ADHD could be a thing, or even ODD. Let me go through some stats for you. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Ultimately, it's a disorder of inhibition, that is, regulation of emotions and behaviours is limited. Treatment, I've seen it happening with kids from the age of 2 or 3. I think that's crazy. I actually think, except in the most extreme cases, it's unconscionable. And I just don't believe that it's appropriate when you're dealing with all of the other developmental realities of that age group. Peak diagnosis, somewhere between 5 and 10 years of age. That's where most kids are getting the diagnosis. Usually you've got to be at least 5 before any pediatrician, GP, psychologist, psychiatrist is going to step in and say, yep, I think we've got ADHD here. Like I said, got to be pretty extreme for it to happen below the age of 5. Prevalence, somewhere between 6 and 10% of Aussie kids have a diagnosis of ADHD. That's based on 2023 National Institute of Health data, so that is pretty well up to date. It is the most diagnosed disorder for kids under about the age of 12 to 14, depending on what data you look at. Now, ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. Once again, when you look at the reality of development for children under the age of 5 or 6, it's just not appropriate for us to say that a little kid has got ODD. Around about 3% of children are diagnosed with ODD. It co-occurs with ADHD a lot, but typically you won't get an ODD diagnosis until the age of 8 and up. Okay? So, what do we do? If, Lisa, you're feeling the way you're feeling and you're looking at this 3-year-old and going, oh my goodness, what in the world is going on here? Look, kids are tough. They're exhausting. They've got their L plates on. They are really, really challenging. And in a world where we've lost our village, a world where there is limited social support, where we don't have aunties and grandmas and uncles and grandpas, and we don't have lots of big siblings, and we don't have cohorts of kids running around and supporting each other, and we're trying to raise our kids within the confines of the 4 walls of our house. This is the stuff that's not natural. What we're doing in terms of what society demands of parents today, it's not fair, it's not natural, it's reality. I don't know what we can do about it, but what you're dealing with is the reality of a system that has been built up around our children that does not cater for them. The world is not kind in catering for kids. Here are a couple of things that they need. Number one, when you've got a 3-year-old, they need physical activity, ideally mixed with a whole lot of social activity. In other words, free play with friends is what I'm talking about, as many hours per day as possible. Play has been widely called the work of childhood. And how many hours a day do we work? Well, 6, 8, 10 hours a day. I don't think that it's appropriate. I don't think it's possible for us to realistically have our kids playing for 6 or 8 or 10 hours a day. Good luck with that if you're paying rent and mortgages and that kind of thing. The world's demands are inappropriate for child development, healthy child development. And so this is a really big challenge. But what I basically say is if you're worried about your child's behavior and they are behaving in these ADHD, ODD kinds of ways, I reckon it's because they need more physical activity, more play, more social engagement. Secondly, bring screen time as close to 0 as possible. And third, big behaviors in this age group are totally normal. So when this happens, remember, this is an issue of inhibition and regulation because they don't know how to do it yet. It's a slow process from about the age of 3 through to about the age of 9. They get better and better as they go on. Talk to any kindergarten teacher. They'll just say the kids are not very good at this. By the time they get to grade 3, they've mostly got it dialed in most of the time. So your child needs empathy, Your child needs developmentally appropriate limits, but mostly lots of kindness and lots of understanding. I really hope that that's a helpful summary of where we're at and why we don't diagnose young kids with ADHD and ODD. If you're looking for more resources, check out my webinar, Little People, Big Feelings, or my book, What Your Child Needs From You. Both are available at happyfamilies.com.au. I think they're going to make a really big difference. Question number 2.
Hi, Justin and Kylie. My name is Jess. I'm a mum of 4 boys, and we have a neurodivergent family. We have ADHD, especially myself. And what I find is that there is not a lot of information regarding about parents with ADHD and how to navigate life stresses and their own, neurodivergent issues on top of the chaos that kids come along with their life. Because most of it's kind of like towards the research on kids. So I just want to see if we could have a podcast about that. Thank you.
Okay, Jess, really appreciate the question. Prevalence of adult ADHD, somewhere between 2 and 6% in Australia. So that means approximately 800,000 adults are walking around Australia right now with ADHD. That is adult Australians who are a little bit hyperactive, a little bit impulsive, a little bit inattentive, and just struggling to hold it all together. Also much more likely if you have ADHD that your kids will as well, which only compounds the challenges. Once again, that's based on May 2023 National Institute of Health data here in Australia. So what do I recommend? As a grown-up, you've made it this far, you've functioned okay. Obviously, there's all sorts of challenges that are associated with it. I really do relate to this. Fundamentally, if it's about inhibition and regulation, it's about setting up systems that require you to rely less on willpower and that kind of push you through the day, and you can get into the flow of I do this, then I do this, then I do that, then I do that. And it's about minimizing the distractions, minimizing the things that are going to pull you away from the things that matter most. Oh, by the way, our world has been designed to make that increasingly hard. And of course, adult ADHD amplifies, magnifies, just makes it even harder again. Here are 3 ideas that might be helpful. Number 1, get enough sleep. The more sleep you have, that is, the more well-rested you are, the better you'll be as a parent, the more you'll be able to regulate, the more effectively you'll be able to engage with the day and do the stuff that you need to do. Number 2, I'm going to recommend that you get organized. And I know that's counterintuitive and antithetical to everything that your brain wants to do, but that's why you need it so much. So sit down and develop, literally map it out. Here's my routine. Here's my structure. Here's my schedule. Here are my lists. This is what I'm doing on Mondays. This is what I'm doing on Fridays. Get the calendar out. Cluster your tasks. And number 3, I would say minimize distractions. Turn off your notifications on your device. Hide the phone, because the digital world is fuel to a fire, especially for an adult with ADHD. It pulls you away from all the stuff that matters. The more you can reduce your interactions with electronic media, digital media, the better off you're going to be. There's a handful of websites. If you just Google around the place and say, what do I do? I'm an adult, I'm a parent with ADHD, and I can't get organized. There's a handful of really helpful websites that are out there, lists, there's some YouTubes. Of course, you could go down the rabbit hole and spend days there. So just find one that's got a good list of, 10 or 20 things. Pick out the 2 or 3 that you think are going to move the needle the most, and then get organized. After that, inhibition, regulation, trying to hold it together, that's going to be the hardest thing. But if you can, you're going to find that your functionality increases, your adaptability and healthy capacity to deal with it is going to be magnified, and you will make progress. Hard work, lots of challenges. That's life. I get it. I really, really really get it. Jess, thanks so much for the question. Lisa, you as well. Big day about ADHD today. You know what? When I'm traveling around and speaking with parents, it's one of the most commonly asked questions, whether it's child or adult ADHD. People really want to know. It's a real pain point right now. So I'm glad we could answer those 2 today. Tomorrow, we're back with the Happy Families podcast and more to make your family flourish. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to submit a question, happyfamilies.com.au. Click on the podcasts link, press record. It's that simple. More questions being answered next Tuesday on the pod. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. For more information about how to make your family happier, happyfamilies.com.au.